Okay, so hopefully at this point you are at least relatively familiar with what an extemp speech is, either because you just watched the previous video on an introduction to extemp or because you are already aware. Regardless, right now, we're going to be going over the structure of an extemp speech. Now, the structure is relatively simple, it's just modeled off any other informative speech. Now, you may remember that the entire purpose of an extemp speech is to answer a question. And so, the purpose of this structure is to allow you to answer the question in the most specific and effective manner possible. So, let's begin with the hook. And never ever underestimate the power of the hook. Now, extemp is notoriously boring to judge. Imagine this. You are a parent judge, you've never judged speech before, but your kids are insisting on entering into this random speech tournament. So they begged you to give up your entire Saturday. You're here, and now you're sitting through 7 boring political speeches given by high schoolers who really don't know what they're talking about. At that point, you may be inclined to vote on the most enthusiastic or fun person to watch. That you want to be you. You want to be the most memorable person, and you can begin by doing that with your hook. Now, your hook can really be whatever you want, just anything to grab the judge's attention. Here we have 4 possible examples. One thing could do is you could sing a popular verse from a song. Now, obviously, that's only possible if you're willing to muster up the courage to do so. But it is highly effective in that it does grab their attention because it is something entirely unexpected. And I've never seen anyone else do that before in round. So hopefully that would be an effective way to grab your judge's attention. You could also recite a quote. Now, this can be a bit difficult to make interesting. However, you could be funny with it. So, for instance, once I saw an extemp on democracy, and the speaker began their speech by quoting Winston Churchill when he famously said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried. You could also tell a personal anecdote. Try to make sure that this does not get too long or too winded. So keep it short, keep it simple. You could also do a fill in the blank kind of hook. This can be useful if you're worried that you're going to blank in the middle of prep and have no idea what to do. Maybe you're not feeling creative, so you should have a bank of fill in the blank hooks that you can draw upon when necessary. These are just hooks that apply to all extemps because they like fill in the blank, essentially. And so, one fill in the blank hook that my debate team came up with that I think is kind of funny is what we call the aliens hook. What you do is you say, if aliens were to look down on Earth and see, this current event that has to do with your speech, then they would say, and then say what they would say in a funny alien voice. You can also combine hooks. So, for example, my debate teacher would always draw upon this one extemp in which the guy used a hook about his grandma. He made up this story about how his grandma would always ask him questions about the news, and he would always do his best to answer them accurately because he knew that if not, she would go to Fox News to learn about current events. And so he said, today, my grandma asked me this question. And so see how you combine personal anecdote and fill in the blank. So, just get creative and have fun with it. Ultimately, grab your judge's attention. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to state the question and the answer because the judge obviously has to know what question you're answering to know how effective your speech is. Now, one problem that I often run into in in-person tournaments is I forget what the question is. Maybe it's super long, for example. And so something you're allowed to do is you're allowed to take this slip of paper with the question on it and put it on a desk in the classroom. And then when you're about to state the question, walk up to the desk, take this slip of paper, and you can read it off the paper. It's fine. No one's bothered by it. And then next, you state your answer. Now, there are many different answers that you could give. Here are the most common ones. Let's say that the question is yes or no. Then you would either do 1, 2, or 3. You could say yes, you could say no, and these are highly recommended. But if you really don't know how to answer the question, you could say qualified yes, which is like saying yes, only under very certain specific conditions. It's kind of like in layman's terms, just saying yes, but maybe no. It's kind of lame, but if you really don't know how to answer the question, then sure, by all means, give a qualified yes. Now, Something else you could do is you could answer the question with a specific policy, which might be necessary based on the way that the question is worded. So, for example, if the question is, how can we end the Yemen civil war? Then it's necessary to answer with the policy or some sort of action. And then something you could do is you could answer the question with three main points. And we're going to return to this particular answer in the future later in this video. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to provide a brief outline of your three main points. You can give whatever main points you want. The point is that you're answering the question in 3 points. You could do problem, cause, solution. So you would say, the question I've received to answer today is this. My answer is this. I'm going to explain my answer via three main points. First being the problem, second the cause, and third the solution. And then you're going to go and explain that in further detail. Something else you could do is you could answer the question in three main points. Answer number one, answer number two, answer number three. So remember right here how we said that one possible answer is just three main points. So in a particularly complicated question, that may be the best way to go about it. If it's super open-ended, for example. So say the question is, what is Trump's legacy? Very open-ended, very complicated question. You may want to answer in three separate ideas. For example, maybe one is, how he affected the rhetoric of the Republican Party or immigration, etc. Okay. The next part of the structure is just going over your three main points. So let's look at the structure. So this is the structure of one singular main point. The way it works is that first you have a claim, right? And that's super basic. What point are you trying to get across? Next, it gets a little muddled. So let's rewind to our good friend Tolman's model. Remember that Tolman's model is claim, data, warrant, or claim, evidence, reasoning, or claim, evidence, commentary. There are a lot of different ways to say it. So we're going to take that and then we're going to alter it a tiny bit and stretch it for an extemp. So the claim stays the same. Now we have some evidence, maybe a statistic, maybe a current event that supports your claim. Next, we're going to go on to the explanation. Explain to me what the evidence means. What does the statistic mean? What are the rhetorical implications? What does that mean for society? Next, we're going to move on to a new piece of evidence, and you're going to give an explanation for that. So it's not like you're throwing a wall of statistics at the judge. It's not like you're telling a bunch of stories about current events. What you're doing is you're presenting this piece of evidence and then explaining what you think about it. Now you're going to give a new piece of evidence that also backs up the claim, and then you're going to explain what you think about it. Now, an explanation is just your interpretation of it. Remember, the entire purpose of an extemp is really to answer a question so that you can show off your own interpretation or analysis of current events. So that's exactly what you do in your explanation. It's kind of like a more flowy, loose, laid back Tillman's model. Okay, finally, the conclusion. You're going to do two things. Number one, you're going to restate the question and the answer, just because that's the entire purpose of the speech. Remind the judge why we're here. Then you're going to have a final ender or thought. This could be very similar to a hook. This could be a final question or statement. Just give the judge something to think about that's hopefully going to make your speech memorable. And that is the structure of an extemp.